Alright, let's get into some advanced game lab stuff, namely sprites with groups, and then eventually what groups really are. So let's start off by just making a few sprites. We're going to make one called Plat1, we'll make Plat2, these are going to be platforms, Plat3, and Plat4. And I want them to all have different positions. I'm going to make this one at 100, 100, 200, 200, we'll do 300, 300, and 400, 400, just to keep things simple here. If I hit run, nothing's going to happen. I do need to throw in a draw sprites, so if I want to, I could put a draw loop and a draw sprites. That's fine. Okay, here they are. Now, you've most likely used set animation before, right? If I wanted to, let's see, make a platform animation here, I'm just going to type the word ground and grab a stone platform here, and I'll just call it ground. And I could just use plat1.setAnimation ground and hit run, and there we go. And obviously I would also need to scale this, wouldn't I? How about plat1.scale 0.25 something? That's a little bit more reasonable. So I could do that for every single sprite, but there's a more efficient way of doing that. So I'm going to throw these out, and instead I'm going to go to groups, and I'm going to say var group gets create group, and I'm going to call this platforms. And now I'm going to add each one of these sprites to this group. So I'm going to say platforms.add plat1, and I'm going to do that for each of these. So I'll do a little copy and paste. And now I can use any of these group tools here. So I could say let's see, set animation each. That would work well for us. Platforms.setAnimation each, set that to ground. And then with that one single line, I've now set the animation of all of them. I could also use set scale each and set that to 0.25, say. Okay, that's good. But when you use these set something each methods that you have under groups, the problem with that is it does not allow you to do anything other than set the property of the entire group. So I can't say, oh, is this platform this kind? I want to set it to this. Or is it a different kind? I want to set it to this. The only thing it can do is affect every single thing in the entire group. So for that reason, we're going to talk about next about how groups are actually something called an array. An array is essentially just a list, and it's a very common coding structure. It is a very important part of JavaScript. And let's look now at how this works. So I'm going to actually take out these set animation each things here. So let's make a very simple array just for sake of example. I'm going to put it down below the draw loop here, and later I'll delete it. So I start by just making a variable like you normally do, give it a name. I'm going to call this one, how about fruit? And to make an array, you start off with a special character, a square bracket. It's the key right next to the letter P, a square bracket, and then inside you're going to put whatever you want. You can put a bunch of numbers. I'm going to put, since fruit are words, I'm going to put strings. So I'll put quotes, and I'll put orange, close quote, and then you separate items with commas. So I'll do orange, banana, strawberry, apple, kiwi, and one more, mango. And then a closing square bracket at the end. Okay, I've just made an array. Notice how it formats it like this. It looks nice. Now, if I want to see the contents of a variable, a reminder, we can use console.log for that. So I can bring console.log down, and if I just leave it as message and I hit run, you can see that's what it will show down here. And I could turn that to whatever I want. If I could say hello, it's going to show hello. If I take out the quotes and I put a variable name, for example, fruit, it's going to show the entire array, and if I click this little drop down, it's going to show all of the items in the array, including the index of each item. That word index, that just refers to what number each item has. So orange is the first one, the first index is always 0. Banana is the second one, so after 0 comes 1, 2, 3, etc. Okay, but what if I don't want to log the entire array to the console? What if I want to access just a certain item? Well, when you access an array, you can use the square brackets as well. So instead of console.log fruit, I could put console.log, and in square brackets, I can put a number, the index. So if I put 0, I'm going to get just orange. There it is. Okay, and if I put just 1, I'm going to get just banana. If I put 2, I'm going to get just strawberry, etc. Now, it's easy enough to access the very first item of an array because the index is always 0. But the very last item of an array is, let's see, in this case, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so index 5 would be the last one. But what if I don't know the length of the array? Or what if the array is going to change in length over time? This is where things are a tiny bit trickier, but there's a way we can do this. I'm going to take out this real quick, and instead of logging one of these items, I'm going to log fruit.length. And that's going to give me a 6 because there are 6 items in the array. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, that gets me closer, but the last index of an array is not 6. If you remember right, it was 5 because the first index was 0. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the last index of an array is actually its length minus 1. And the reason for that is that the first index is 0. So if I want to get the last item from the array, I can do console.log fruit, and then inside the square brackets, fruit.length minus 1. That is the magic ingredient to get the last item of any array. And if I were to take something off of this, like if I chop off mango and I hit run again, now it's logging kiwi. So this will always work. The first index is 0, the last index is array name.length minus 1. Okay, so why did we talk about all of that? How does that have anything to do with game labs or sprites? Let's talk about what's next here. Okay, we talked before about how we made a group. We made a group called platforms. Well, guess what? Groups are actually just arrays. So let's take a look at what we mean by that for a second. Let's play with console.log for a second. So if I go console.log and I can actually log a sprite to the console if I want. If I log plat1, we're going to get some weird stuff. A sprite has all sorts of different properties. This is a complicated JavaScript object here. And as you just saw, I can log arrays to the console too. And platforms is our array. It's just a group. So if I log platforms, let's see what we get. Okay, now I can see I have an array, and each one of those is a sprite. One is plat, so this first index, this 0, that's plat1, because that was the first thing I added. This index 1 here, that's plat2, plat3, plat4. They're all in that array. Here's why this matters. We can set the properties of these platforms without even typing their names. We can set their properties by referring to them as items in the array, as items of the platforms array. Let's try that. So I'm actually going to go to sprites, and I'm going to do set animation, and the animation is going to be ground. But instead of putting like plat1 right here, I'm going to do platforms, which remember that's our group, which is an array, and if I put in square brackets 0, guess what? That's now referring to the first item. So if I hit run, look at that. It has now affected the first one. And if I make it a 1, it's going to be the second one. 2, it's the next one. 3, it's the next one. Now, if I put a 4, it's going to give me an error because there is no fourth one there, right? There's no fifth platform. There's no index 4 here. Okay, so now that we understand that we can refer to sprites by their index in a group, that opens up something entirely new that Code.org doesn't really teach you about, but that is super useful if you want to make more advanced games. Let's look at this. Okay, if you go to Control, you'll find something here that's called a for loop. I'm going to give myself a little space here. I'm going to move this draw loop down out of the way a little bit. Okay, a for loop you can drag in here. There's some interesting things to take a look at here. It starts off with for and then var I gets 0. The next thing is while I is less than 4, and then the last thing is I++. Now, I is just a little local variable that's built into this loop. It starts off, you can call it whatever you want. I is common for index. It starts off at 0. This next thing says keep running as long as I is less than 4. And the last thing says do this to I each time the loop runs. In this case, make I go up by 1. So if we hit run, it's going to run one time. I is going to be equaling 0. It's going to go up every time the loop runs, and it will run as long as I is less than 4. Let's try it out with a console.log just so we can see how this works. So I'm going to say console.log. Now if I just say message, it's going to write message to the screen 4 times. If I were to make this while I is less than 6, well, it's going to run it now 6 times. Now that's handy for just repeating a certain bit of code as much as you want, but you can also use I inside the loop. So for example, if I say message and then I say plus I, now I'll get message 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see why that is. I was equal to 0 the first time, then it went up by 1, ran again, it was equal to 1 the next time, and it kept running as long as I was less than 6, which is why it only went up to 5. Okay, so the reason that we use for loops, one of the main reasons we use for loops, and the reason that this little variable is called I, is because they are perfect for working with arrays or groups. So let's get to that now. So let's say now I want to use this for loop to set the animations of the first 2 of these platform sprites. So I'll go to sprites here and I'll grab set animation. I know my animation that I want is ground. And instead of sprite, I'm going to say platforms I. Now this is a very special technique here because each time this loop runs, the very first time I will equal 0. So that will affect platforms index 0, which would set the animation of the first one. Then when it equals 1, it would set the animation of the second one, etc. So I'm just going to change this I is less than, let's start with I is less than 1 and just hit run. And notice it does the first one. Let's make that now 2. It does the first and the second. If I do the third, first, second, third, do the fourth, now it's going to do all of them. Now, I think we should probably set the scale as well here because this looks pretty bad. So why don't we go ahead and just add that now. I'm just going to make the same thing. Platforms I.scale, and we'll make this 0.25. Let's hit run again. Okay, better. Now, if I were to make this less than 5, as we talked about, I'm going to get an error because there is no 5th index here. So previously, we mentioned how the last index of any array is the length of that array minus 1. So this is the last piece to make this perfect. So I get 0 while I is less than platforms.length. Now, we don't actually need to put the minus 1, and the reason is because this is already a less than, So it will only run up until the last valid index. So we don't have to worry about the -1. So this now, no matter how many platforms we have in our array, will set the animation and the scale of every single one. So we could test this by let's reposition them a little bit and add another one just so you could try it. We'll make a plat 5, and we'll add plat 5 to that group. And we'll hit run. There's our 5th platform. So why would this be useful? Because after all, couldn't we just do the exact same thing with set animation each? We could. What we can do now, though, is we can use if statements within this for loop to set things differently. So, for example, let's add another animation type here. And I'm going to get one that looks like grass, for example. Give it a better name. So now we could use an if statement like, for example, maybe I only want platforms that are on the left half of the screen to be this ground, and the rest I want to be the grass. So I could grab an if statement, put it inside of the for loop, and I can say if platforms I dot x is, say, less than 200, then do these things. And if I hit run now, only the ones that are on the left half of the screen are going to work. And then I could, if I want, maybe put an else. And set the other ones to grass. Now it doesn't matter how many platforms I have, any that are on the left-hand side of the screen are going to get one kind of animation. Any on the others are going to get the other. It doesn't. I could have 1,000 platforms in here. That will always happen just with this much code. I don't have to set them separately anymore. Now, having them change based on X position is probably a little bit less common. So something that would be an even more advanced technique here. Code.org doesn't specifically tell you about this, but because sprites are just JavaScript objects, you can give them your own properties if you want to. So let's take this one final step here. I've made these platforms. I can give them whatever property names I want just by typing the sprite dot and then a new property name. So I'm going to do plat1 dot type gets, and I'm going to say stone, and I'm going to do that for all of them. I'll set one to stone, then grass, stone, then grass. Now, I just made this up. I just decided to call this property type. It didn't exist, so I made it, and I set it equal to this string of text called stone and grass. Now I can use that in my if statement. So right here I can now say if platforms I dot type is equal to grass, then I'll set the animation. I'll do platforms I dot set animation, set it to grass. And then I could have another if statement. I mean, I could have an else, but imagine I have a whole bunch of different types. I might want to do it this way. You know what would probably make the most sense? Just do a little copy paste, save myself some time. And I'll check to see this time if it's equal to stone. I'll set it to this animation. And if I hit run, look at that. Now I forgot my scale. I'll probably put that back in right here. Make it 0.35. Put the scale back in. Let's hit run again. All right, now why is that useful? Well, look at this. Now I could change the type of any of these kind just by modifying this string. So I could make the first one is now grass. Maybe the fourth one is now stone. And I can use this type property inside of this for loop to control all sorts of interactions as my game runs. So maybe if the player touches one kind of platform, they bounce off it. Maybe they just stand on it. Maybe they fall right through it. So I have total control over interactions of all my different platforms and the way they look. Maybe the stone ones are always bigger than the other ones, so I can control the size of these ones separately now. So this, the takeaway here that adds so much power to this is that, first of all, groups of sprites are actually just arrays, and that you can use a for loop to go through that group, to go through that array of sprites and check for, use if statements to check things about them and then make changes to them with any of these different sprite properties here, as however you want to. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. If you can learn how to use this, it unlocks a lot of really powerful things that otherwise you just wouldn't be able to do in GameLab.